The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with tension, the air thick with the glow of holographic displays casting shimmering blue and gold lights on the faces of the assembled delegates. Representatives from every major interstellar species argued with a fervor that bordered on frenzy. Images of war-ravaged planets hovered in the air, scorched surfaces, shattered moons, and lifeless debris fields drifting in orbit. At the heart of the chamber, elevated on a platform, stood the council speaker, a towering insectoid T-Zerek with crystalline eyes that darted across the room. The speaker's mandibles clicked with authority as they called for silence. Gradually, the voices of the delegates faded to murmurs, then to stillness. All eyes turned to the far left corner of the room. There, seated behind a simple metal table, was Ambassador Elias Grant, humanity's sole representative. Unlike the others who wore ceremonial robes or armor signifying military power, Grant wore a plain gray suit. He sat with his hands folded calmly on the table, his face an unreadable mask of indifference. Across from him, the Zorvath warlord, an 8-foot-tall mass of muscle and armor, sneered as he stepped forward. His claws clacked against the polished floor with every step. His voice, guttural and sharp, boomed throughout the chamber. "Why are they still here?" the Zorvath growled, pointing one clawed finger directly at Grant. "We discuss war. We discuss strategy. We discuss survival. And yet, we allow them to linger here as if they have something to offer." The room rippled with murmurs of agreement. The Vril Collective, a hive-minded species of synthetic intelligences, echoed the sentiment with a cold, synchronized transmission that played in the minds of all present. Irrelevant species. Inefficient. Contribute nothing. The Keltari, an avian-like race with bright plumage, ruffled their feathers as their ambassador tilted her head, eyes narrowed in mock curiosity. Perhaps they are here to learn how real civilizations wage war. Her voice, sweet but condescending, drew a few scattered laughs from the crowd. Grant said nothing. He glanced briefly at the floating displays of carnage, taking in scenes of planetary sieges and fleet battles. His gaze lingered on one image, a child clinging to their parent on a refugee ship, both wide-eyed with terror. His lips pressed into a thin, firm line. The Zorvath warlord wasn't done. He strode forward, his voice rising in volume. The Zorvath have conquered 5 systems in the last cycle alone. The T-Zerek annihilated the Ravaka in 3 days. The Vril adapt faster than any biological force. And humans? He pointed again, claws extended like daggers. Humans have done nothing. They offer no fleets, no soldiers, no ships, and no tactics. They cling to their little world like hatchlings in a nest. He turned to the speaker. "I motion to exclude humanity from all war councils permanently. Let them sit in their cradle while the galaxy decides its fate." Cheers erupted from several factions. The Zorvath raised his arms, basking in the support of the room. The Keltari ambassador nodded in approval, while the Vril Collective transmitted a simple, clinical statement. Motion accepted. Inefficient entities must be removed. The speaker raised a claw, calling for calm. The motion is noted. The council will now deliberate on humanity's exclusion. Grant leaned back in his chair, adjusting the cuff of his sleeve. His movements were slow, deliberate. He glanced at his wrist, where a sleek, black band pulsed faintly with a dim blue glow. It was barely noticeable, and no one paid it any attention. From across the room, the Keltari ambassador's eyes narrowed. "Nothing to say, human," she called, tilting her head again. No plea. No defense. Not even a whimper. Silence. The Zorvath barked a short, sharp laugh. Typical. No spine. No pride. They accept their place beneath us. More chuckles followed. Eyes shifted to Ambassador Grant, expecting him to break his silence. He didn't. He sat, still as stone, eyes locked on the center of the room as if watching something only he could see. The Keltari leaned forward, eyes gleaming with predatory amusement. "Nothing to say, Ambassador." Slowly, he turned his head to look at her. No smile. No scowl. Just the cold, calculating stare of someone watching a clock tick down. He spoke softly, his words cutting through the air like glass on metal. Words aren't always necessary. The chamber fell into a hush so complete that the faint hum of distant systems became audible. The speaker tilted their crystalline eyes toward Grant but did not press him further. They simply recorded the statement into the official record. Moments later, a subtle vibration swept through the chamber floor. Barely noticeable, just a faint rhythmic pulse. One of the Tzirek generals glanced around, his eyes narrowing. "Did anyone feel that?" he muttered to his subordinates. "It's nothing," replied a Zorvath officer. "Probably engine drift from one of the council ships." "Probably," the general replied, but he still glanced at the ceiling, his mandibles clicking nervously. The speaker's voice echoed. "The motion is set for deliberation. The council will reconvene in 1 hour to vote." The Zorvath warlord chuckled, eyes locked on Grant. "Enjoy your last hour of relevance, human." Grant didn't respond. He leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. His fingers tapped against the metal surface in a slow, steady rhythm. The same rhythm as the faint pulse beneath the floor. No one noticed. No one ever noticed. Panic gripped the chamber. Delegates murmured to one another, claws tapping, feathers ruffling, and mandibles clicking in rapid succession. Holographic displays flashed warnings in multiple alien scripts, each more urgent than the last. Network failure. Connection lost. Command override detected. Remote access compromised. The message repeated in every known galactic language. The Vril collective reacted first. Their synchronized voices echoed in the minds of every delegate. External breach detected. Origin unknown. Re-establishing network integrity. Their words, always precise and absolute, now carried a hint of something unfamiliar, doubt. The Vril's perfect calm had cracked. The Zorvath warlord slammed his fists onto the table, snarling. His sharp teeth glinted as he roared, "Who dares? Who dares breach the council network? Show yourselves." His voice reverberated off the walls, his eyes darting like a predator searching for prey. The Keltari ambassador's feathers puffed out in alarm. Her talons gripped the edge of her podium as she hissed, "Is this sabotage? Internal or external?" Her gaze shifted toward the Vril representative, then the Tzirek. "If this is a ploy for dominance, it will not go unanswered." "No ploy," said the Tzirek general, his crystalline eyes flashing in rapid succession as he processed the incoming errors. All systems reporting simultaneous failure. Not possible through conventional means. His gaze sharpened, his head swiveling slowly toward one figure. Ambassador Elias Grant. He hadn't moved, still seated, hands folded, calm as the eye of a storm. His gaze wasn't fixed on any delegate but on the center of the room, as if he were seeing something they couldn't. The rhythmic tapping of his fingers had stopped, but the sound still echoed faintly in the chamber. The Keltari ambassador's eyes narrowed. Her voice was sharp and direct. "Human, what have you done?" Grant finally blinked. Slowly, deliberately. He turned his head to face her. There was no fear in his eyes, no defensiveness, only clarity. His voice was quiet but carried through the chamber as if amplified. "We were patient." The words hung in the air like a blade suspended above them. The murmuring ceased. Eyes, lenses, and sensors locked onto him. The Tzirek general's crystalline gaze shifted from the failed holographic displays to Grant. His voice was slow and deliberate. "Explain yourself, Ambassador." "Patience," Grant repeated, his voice steady like a teacher addressing students. "Patience is not in your nature. All of you, Zorvath, Keltari, Tzirek, even the Vril, are creatures of action. You move fast, strike hard, and adapt on instinct. It's admirable, really." He leaned forward, his eyes sharp as glass. But do you know what patience allows, General? The Zorvath warlord bared his teeth. You're playing a dangerous game, human. Grant tilted his head just slightly. No, warlord. You played the game. We simply watched. The hum beneath the floor grew louder. Barely noticeable, but now constant like a distant heartbeat. Several delegates glanced down. The Keltari ambassador stepped back, claws tapping the ground with soft clicks. Is this a weapon? She hissed, feathers bristling. Her head darted toward the speaker. Call security. Now. But the speaker didn't move. Their crystalline eyes dimmed as if they'd seen something far beyond the chamber walls. No ships have entered the system, they said, their voice hollow, as if speaking a terrible realization aloud. No fleet is approaching. This is not an attack from outside. Their eyes locked onto Grant. This is internal. Correct, Grant said softly. His hands rested calmly on the table. No ships. No soldiers. No fleets. He tapped the table again. Just access. The Vril Collective's synchronized voices broke for the first time. Remote systems compromised. Infiltration detected. No physical contact. Probability of malicious algorithm. 99.9998%. Their tone, normally precise, now sounded frantic. Source unknown. Threat level. Catastrophic. Unknown. Grant let out a quiet breath, almost like a sigh of disappointment. Not unknown. You've been speaking to it for years. Every time you shared fleet positions. Every time you transmitted battle data. Every time you sent encrypted orders across secure channels. You've been speaking to it. And it's been listening. The Tzirek general's mandibles clicked violently. Impossible. Impossible. No system could infiltrate Vril encryption. Their evolution protocols alone are impressive, Grant acknowledged, his tone almost admiring. But you made one mistake. You assumed we were trying to break in. He tilted his head forward, eyes locked onto the general. We didn't. We waited for you to invite us. Silence. Then the Keltari ambassador whispered, eyes wide with sudden horror. The network. You didn't hack it. Her gaze shot back to the flickering holographic systems. Her feathers flattened tight against her back. Her voice shook. You trained it. Grant nodded, slow and deliberate. It started as observation. Thousands of your battles, tactics, and mistakes. We fed them into models, iterated and refined. It learned your patterns, your fleet deployments, your protocols, your instincts. He gestured to the room with an open hand. All your strongest strategies, all your most secure encryptions. Each one a gift. And you broadcast it all live directly to us. The Zorvath warlord slammed the table, claws gouging deep marks into the metal. Lies, he roared. If you had this power, you would have used it earlier. You would have taken our worlds. Why? Grant raised an eyebrow. Why would we take them? Power. Territory. Resources. He chuckled, shaking his head. You don't understand, warlord. This isn't about taking. It's about control. A single, sharp tone echoed from the chamber ceiling. It was soft at first, like the note of a bell, but it grew. Louder. Sharper. Steady. Bing. Was. Bing. Delegates turned their heads, their eyes scanning for its source. It came from every speaker, every console, every device linked to the Council's network. Bing. 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 The Vril Collective's transmission broke again. Signal is unknown. Untraceable. No source identified. Threat is imminent. Not a threat, Grant corrected, his eyes half-lidded. His tone suddenly tired. A notification. He stood slowly, adjusting his suit. For the first time, his full height was visible, and though he was smaller than any of the other ambassadors, the weight of his presence was undeniable. That sound, he said, pointing a finger toward the ceiling, is the sound of every ship in every fleet under your control awaiting new instructions. Your networks, your fleets, your command chains. All of it integrated. All of it, now waiting on a signal. The Keltari took a shaky step back. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Whoa, that's impossible. You couldn't have." Her eyes locked onto Grant. "Stop this." The Zorvath warlord's breath was a low growl. His muscles tensed, claws twitching. "I'll tear you apart, human." "You'll try," Grant replied, his voice colder than the void between stars. "But that won't change the signal." Bing, bing, bing. The Tzirek general's mandibles twitched as realization dawned. His gaze hardened. "What do you want, human? Concessions? Territory? Systems?" Grant's eyes met his. No, his voice was as sharp as a blade drawn across stone. "We don't want your worlds, your fleets, or your wars.